reading Humanocracy, if you haven't read Humanocracy. That's a book that, like, I'd never read until recently, but everything, like, you read those first two chapters and you're going to be like, Ed said all this shit in the past 6 months. Like, that's the thought you're going to...
Yeah, Ed read this
But it's
past
like,
6 months.
it's clear, like, all the stuff I was seeing the past couple of years, the authors of that book were also seeing. They just write better than me. But it's a lot of the stuff that I've been saying about scalability. But the book goes into a lot about bureaucracy and traditional bureaucracy in companies. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about the speed to innovation. And it's like, every time some new thing gets created, it's like the future is foggy, right? If you think of the future as this, like, you could see through the fog, but only a little bit, right? And maybe I can see a little further than you in like one area, but collectively the future is foggy for all of us. And every time some new invention comes along, and an invention can just sometimes be a thought, right? Or something that someone posted, even like a tweet of shower thoughts that someone posted at Twitter, right? That can spark that imagination of people seeing the future a little bit clearer, right? But oftentimes it's that, product that comes out where people realize the new potential. When that happens, it's like putting a little torch in that fog where it dissipates some of it, and then we all collectively are able to see a little bit more of the future. And when that happens, that's where you get those moments, I think, where all around the world people are all seeing the potential at the same time, right? There's that aha moment that you have yourself, but there's people all around the world who are having that same aha moment at that same time. And so the question is, in a vacuum, ignoring competition or noticing other people trying to build the same thing, how quickly can you execute on that idea when you have that aha moment? And I think the biggest barrier to that execution is usually bureaucracy. In big companies, I think in a vacuum, all things being equal, a typical big company would probably take 10 years to execute on that idea once they have it. Startups typically take 2 years to execute on that idea. And that's probably surprising to some people, because I think some people think of startups as being these fast-moving, super innovative kind of companies. But in reality, even when you have startup founders who are able to immediately just go into their garage and start building the thing, usually after about 6 months of building, they get stuck in the mud because of bureaucracy. Because at some point they've built the thing enough where now they have to go convince other people their idea is good, and you need to go put together your pitch deck and sell it to VCs, and then raise some of that money and put together your roadmap and figure out your payroll, because now you're too busy pitching investors that now you have to hire other people to actually build the thing that you started building, because you're too busy figuring out. Then you got to figuring out payroll, HR benefits, trying to figure out where your office is going to be. So you're spending all this time doing bureaucratic kind of stuff, and then you're raising money so you can hire a team to build the thing that you yourself normally would have built, but now you have to hire other people to build it. But now, because you have to make payroll, you're then trying to go pitch more investors to raise more money to feed the machine. And what I noticed in startups I was at, and I've noticed this in startups that we coach, is, and this is just me guessing, I'd say there's probably 2 years of wasted effort in bureaucracy. And, the way a lot of startups go is, some of them, I imagine a lot of startups fail, not because their idea isn't good or the timing isn't right or they don't have the ability to execute, but maybe it's just they didn't raise quite enough money to get through the bureaucracy pieces so they could get to actually building the right thing, right? And then they end up falling apart, and then they go and they try to create another startup, and again, another 2 years wasted in bureaucracy with their new startup idea. And so then compounded over time, you can have an entrepreneur over the course of 10 years, only have 3, maybe 4 startup ideas that they've put a chance on. Each one of those collectively all together, wasting 8 years worth of, that kind of paperwork, bureaucratic kind of distraction that keeps them from the innovation. And we're living in a world where innovation's happening quicker and quicker. The time to market on things is kind of faster. Technology's made it easier for someone in their garage to just do it and bootstrap it. And a lot of people nowadays are going that route more and more sometimes. There's a lot of ideas where it's just, you know what, I'm not going to raise money, I'm just going to build the thing and see how far I can get just building it. But sometimes there's always a limit to that, right? At some point, you have to try to make something bigger than just yourself. And I think that's where startups kind of hit that wall. And that's where that 2-year penalty kind of comes in. If you want an innovative company, you have to, like, people always say, oh, my company's an innovative company, or I want my company to be innovative. But usually they say that, but their actions don't match that. Usually they allow their company to succumb to the bureaucracy that doesn't allow their team to be innovative, as opposed to growing all the individuals within your team to always be acting in an entrepreneurial way, experimenting on new ideas, trying new things.
Very cool. I love it. What has been annoying you in client meetings lately?
One of the clients talking to this week, I guess like the other week we realized they didn't have a shared vision as a company. Everyone in the company had different perspectives of what was the most important thing to be doing. To simplify it, talking about, which is more important, building something that users find useful, or building out the features that allow a user to pay us money so we can say we're post-revenue, right? And it's like, which is more important? And there was sort of disagreement within the company around it, which is fine. But it's like, okay, well, what is your shared vision? What is your shared North Star? And some of that can be formed in vision statements, or, value statements, or however it is you want to put it. But you have to, the company kind of needs to have that shared North Star of where you're trying to get to. And that's not something I would have ever said before in my career, because I've always found like those kinds of vision statements and shared values and all that stuff is, most companies, it's copy paste and usually fairly throwaway. But I think it is important for it to be bespoke and thoughtful, and not just like a copy paste from what other companies do. But you do kind of need to lay that in the sand and say, here's what we care about, even if it's for the next 6 months, or even if it's just the next year, saying, look, until we get to Series A, here is the most important thing. And the goal there being that if leadership has to disappear for a week and the rest of the company is left to its own devices, everyone should generally be rowing in the same direction. They may have disagreements about the right way to get there, and so there may be some things there, but if everyone has a shared understanding of where they're trying to get to, then arguments will be much more productive. You'll have much more interesting things there. Another thing I was thinking about more is, we've talked about hypothesis-driven development, but realizing that hypothesis-driven development probably stems from assumptions. And, I mean, not probably, it does. But those assumptions are kind of important, and I think it's a step that people skip. So anytime you're forming a business, or anytime you're trying to build something new, there's assumptions baked in. And I don't think people verbalize them enough or write them down. In my mind, they should be written down. So, usually the base assumption is someone wants to buy this thing. Okay, sure. Like, that is a fair assumption. But spelling those out of, like, here's all the things that we think are true, or we don't know if they're true or not, but there's no way for us to test them. So we just have to rely on faith that we think this is true. Like maybe this bit of technology is finally mature enough that it's ready for consumers to want it. Whereas maybe the technology existed a few years ago, but it was clunky and confusing and users weren't ready for it. But we think users are ready now. Well, that's hard to test, right? That's not something you can build and test against in the next month. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. So that might be something that you won't be able to test for a year or two. And the way you test it is, hey, we actually got customers paying us money. That's the proof in the pudding that assumption's correct. So listing out all those assumptions, I think also then helps those disagreements, especially between the founding team, be much more productive. Because if we can agree on what we're assuming, what you and I have a shared assumptions around, then that's our North Star. You can distill that down into values or principles or whatever, but that is your North Star of we're all operating under these shared assumptions. Now, if we do that as an exercise, you and I, and some of our assumptions are misaligned, where I'm assuming users care about A, but you assume users actually care about B, and A and B not being compatible, like being two diverging paths, right? and you feel really strongly about your assumption, I feel really strongly about mine. Well, that's important, right? That's one of those things where you could end up with founders like being at each other's throats because they completely disagree on the path to go down. So that's probably the most important thing to clear up as quickly as possible. And the way you would clear that up is that's the best kind of hypothesis to form from one of those assumptions. Like, pick which one would be the easiest to build something against in less than a month. Even if what you're building is a survey that you're passing out to users, or a landing page to a website that's text only with some pictures, that's a sales pitch, or a YouTube video that you're recording where you explain your vision, or whatever it is. Building something that you think you can put together in less than a month that's going to take one of those assumptions and knock it out. Either prove that it's right or prove that it's wrong. Because then, even if you and I disagree about those assumptions, we can agree, hey, look, if we can just, let's flip a coin if we can't agree. Flip a coin, and we're going to try to test one of those in less than a month. Build something that's going to give us some sort of indication as how it's feeling. And at the end of that month, if you and I are still disagreed, well, then we either continue testing that one, right? Maybe we do something different to test it in a different way, or we test yours instead of mine. Maybe we tested mine for the first month. Now let's test yours. Whatever's necessary to, as quickly as possible, get you and I on the same page of our shared assumptions. Now, hopefully that's not the case. I mean, I think there's a lot of founding teams out there where you might do an assumption exercise and you realize that you have shared assumptions, that we're both on the same page of all the things we're assuming. Then the question is, okay, well, which of these assumptions is kind of a really big deal? And then those ones, and you might have to go through a couple rounds of exercises with this, but hopefully you can take that list of assumptions and say, okay, which ones are testable? Which ones are testable, but like it's like if we tested it and it turned out true or false, it's not really going to move, it's not going to change our strategy any, right? So which ones would change our strategy? Which ones would, if we don't test them and we just build for 6 months and then find out we're wrong, would mean that we wasted 6 months worth of dev effort? And try to narrow it down to what things should you be testing. And again, trying to say, what could I build in less than a month that would prove or disprove one of these assumptions? And again, not just any assumption, but a high leverage assumption. An assumption that's going to either save us a lot of time or give us wisdom that the competition wouldn't have. And if you can do that, and you can do it again and again, month over month, you're slowly knocking these out, you're getting wiser as a company, you're learning things your competition didn't have, you're maybe wasting a little bit of time building the wrong thing, but at most you're only wasting a month or two building the wrong thing before you do a soft pivot in a direction that matters more. And that is then hopefully meaning that you're wasting less time than your competition. So not only are you wiser than your competition, but you're wasting less time building the wrong thing. And now you're probably going to be in a heck of a lot stronger position to raise money or get to revenue quicker. Again, whatever your financial runway is for your team, you're going to get there faster. And you know what? Even if, for unfortunate reasons, your startup still implodes, because you didn't waste a year, I don't know, building a mobile app where users can log in and they can get notifications and they can reset their password and they can do all these things, except actually, anything meaningful to your business, right? You could easily spend a year building apps like that. And then at the end of that year, not actually know anything more about what your users value. But if you fail in your business, but you learn so much because you were just testing hypotheses over and over again, well, maybe that failed and you had to run out of money and that idea didn't work. But now you're wiser for it. And so now you might start a new venture that's maybe similar or a slight tangent to the old one, but it's based on the same knowledge and wisdom that you gained from that first effort. And so then nothing was wasted because now you're a wiser, smarter founder going into your next venture, instead of wasting a year building something that never actually taught you anything. Because again, all you did was focus on a login page and a dashboard, and users can change their settings and users can get email notifications and all these things that every app needs anyway. It didn't teach you anything. And oftentimes you may end up building against one or two hypotheses without realizing it. But again, maybe you allowed too many months of dev effort to be spent wasted on things like password reset is like the one joke I've been using recently, because we have an app that still hasn't implemented password reset, because we've been doing this approach and just saying, look, it's not as important as building this other thing that we could actually test. It's going to tell us something meaningful. So we keep kicking password reset to the right. Although I think finally that's finally getting built in, because it's time. It's time. It needs to be in there finally. And there will be moments where you're like, look, we look like amateurs if we don't add password reset. So let's get it in there finally. But it shouldn't be your thing. There's a million things like that could distract you on your journey. And so having more of a hypothesis-driven development doesn't mean you don't ever build those things. It just means you're prioritizing one thing over another. And so you're spending 80% of your time building against hypotheses, and then making sure your dev team is spending 20% of their time doing some of those base things that have to happen, that are more foundational, fundamental.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff.